Marvin Watson, a legendary boxer, faced not the roar of the ring, but the silent, tense streets filled with racism. Stopped by a police officer and accused of a crime he didn't commit, Marvin knew his strength wouldn't matter now. The tension grew. The crowd watched. This would either break him or make him stronger. Marvin Watson was a tall, athletic man with powerful arms that bore fresh marks from training. His skin glistened with sweat from a grueling night at the gym, where the rhythmic thud of gloves against the heavy bag and the shouts of trainers had been his soundtrack. His dark, slightly curly hair was neatly trimmed, showcasing discipline and precision, honed over years of strict routines. His deep brown eyes were resolute, bearing the intensity of someone used to facing challenges head-on, yet an alertness now shimmered in them. His breathing was controlled, the steady rise and fall of his chest the only sign of the effort behind him. He wore track pants and a loose t-shirt emblazoned with the emblem of the local boxing club, renowned citywide for producing champions, fighters who clawed their way to the top. Tonight, after a rigorous session of training, Marvin moved with a measured, purposeful stride down the street. The late evening shrouded the city in a thin, mysterious haze that crept through the air, coiling around the dimly lit streets like an uninvited specter. The weak glow of the streetlights cast long, uneven shadows, stretching across the cracked pavement, making each step echo sharply in the stillness of the sleeping neighborhood. The city, usually buzzing with life, seemed to hold its breath. Only the rustling wind, whispering through the leaves, and the sporadic hum of a passing car disturbed the silence. Marvin welcomed the cool air, a sharp contrast to the heat that clung to him, mingled with the faint metallic tang of sweat. In the distance, a police cruiser sat under the fluorescent wash of a street lamp, its metallic sheen stark and foreboding in the dim glow. The sight would have been unremarkable if not for the figure leaning against it. Officer Robert Grayson stood with an unmistakable presence, his piercing eyes following Marvin's every movement. A man marked by years of service, Grayson was a middle-aged white man with cropped gray hair that betrayed both experience and exhaustion. The deep lines etched into his face spoke of countless long nights and unwavering commitment. His jaw was set in a tight line, arms folded across his chest, a living monument of command and control. "Hey, you! Stop!" Grayson's voice cut through the quiet like a sharp blade, an order wrapped in steel. He stepped forward with a confident stride, every movement deliberate and unyielding. The abrupt command snapped Marvin from his thoughts, adrenaline surging through him like an electric current. The street, once just an empty canvas under a waning moon, now felt taut with tension. Years in the ring had prepared Marvin to control his breathing, to steady the rush of blood that quickened in his ears. But this was different. Here, in the dim alleyways and shadowed corners, there were no ropes to define the boundaries, no referee to keep things fair. Marvin halted mid-step, pivoting to face the source of the shout. His gaze met Grayson's, cautious but unreadable, every muscle in his body attuned to the moment. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked, voice low and unwavering, refusing to let the tension seep into his tone. The two men stood in the charged silence, the night pressing down on them like an unseen weight, each waiting for the other to make the next move. Officer Grayson, tall with a solid build and severe features, gave Marvin a hard, scrutinizing look from head to toe. His sharp eyes, narrowed, hinted at distrust and latent threat. In the dim light, the officer's face looked almost carved from stone, with furrows around his mouth and forehead emphasizing his stern demeanor. He tilted his chin up slightly, asserting dominance, and moved a step closer, blocking any escape from his gaze. "Out at this hour? Drugs? Robbery?" The rapid-fire questions broke the silence, leaving no room for explanation. Grayson's tone carried the challenge of a man who saw accusations as the first step to seizing control. The tension was palpable. Marvin felt the pressure coiling in his body, muscles taut and ready, but he kept his composure. A slight tremor ran through his arms as his heart raced, a silent alarm of impending danger. He was used to attention, from spectators in packed arenas to rivals in the ring. But this was different. There were no rules here, no coach yelling "stop." The injustice stung like a thorn, clouding his mind momentarily, but his mastery of self-control, his greatest weapon, resurfaced. "I'm coming back from training, officer. I'm a professional boxer," Marvin said, voice even and deliberate, keeping emotions at bay. He spoke each word clearly, with measured precision, showing confidence without provocation. Grayson smirked, his lips twisting into a sarcastic grin, eyes glinting with contempt. "A boxer, huh? Then you must know how to dodge trouble. But this time, you won't." His tone was hard, almost mocking. This was more than an interrogation. It was a test, a subtle duel of nerves and presence. Meanwhile, passers-by began to gather, drawn by the raised voices. They paused, phones in hand, capturing the scene on video. A murmur spread through the crowd. "What's going on? Isn't that Marvin, the boxer?" Marvin noticed the glow of screens from the corner of his eye, felt the presence of the crowd swell, both a shield and a new source of pressure. Marvin felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him. Some were curious, others worried, while a few looked judgmental and skeptical. The crowd's murmur grew, each whisper or phrase striking his nerves. Struggling to stay calm, he recalled his coach's words. True strength isn't just in the punch, but in enduring pressure outside the ring. Taking a deep breath, he suppressed the rising tide of anger and frustration. Officer Grayson sensed the shifting tide as the crowd grew restless and took a step forward, raising his voice to reassert control. "Did I tell you to stop talking?" he shouted, aiming to silence the onlookers and re-establish dominance. But a bold voice rang out from within the throng. "Hey, that's the champ! Why are they holding him up?" Grayson paused, glancing back at the speaker. Displeasure flashed across his face, an authority momentarily undermined. He turned back, his face set in a mask of severity, but it was too late. The bystanders, once passive, began murmuring louder, their whispers transforming into pointed questions. "Do you know who he is? He's our city's pride," called a young man with a phone, recording everything. The crowd's energy shifted, and in the growing wave of voices, social media posts began to spread. Grayson saw the shift, the once supportive eyes now full of judgment. His face twisted with irritation and uncertainty. Control was slipping. Marvin, holding his head high, met the officer's stare with a calm, defiant gaze. He knew he wasn't alone. The crowd was behind him, and justice was no longer just his fight, but theirs too. As the police questioning continued, tension thickened in the air. Spectators relayed the incident through calls and live streams, sharing it widely. The chief of police, known for advocating justice and fairness, quickly learned about the escalating situation. He couldn't afford to ignore the public's reaction. When the chief arrived at the scene, his stern eyes landed on Grayson, whose composure faltered. The crowd quieted, watching intently. The chief exchanged a few clipped words with Grayson, their tone low but firm, hinting that there would be consequences. Grayson clenched his jaw, recognizing the implications, and reluctantly stepped back. "Mistake. Move along," he muttered, avoiding Marvin's gaze, his tone laced with defeat. He knew his reputation would be battered by the event, and the consequences were likely to be harsh. Marvin didn't respond. He turned and walked away, fists unconsciously clenched. Anger boiled inside him, but he maintained control. This was a lesson, not just for him, but for everyone who witnessed the moment. It was a testament that injustice could be faced not with shouting, but with unyielding resolve. In the following days, the incident continued to trend in news stories and social media posts. Grayson faced mounting complaints, and the police leadership, keen to avoid further scandal, reassigned him to a less influential role. Marvin returned to his training, but with renewed motivation. He understood now that strength was more than punches. It was the power to remain steadfast in the face of unfairness. That lesson stayed with him, guiding both his boxing and his life.